Hello everyone, and welcome to Garry on Lockdown for Avast. This episode is about something dear to us all, the freedom to speak our minds without fear. When I grew up in the Soviet Union, there were plenty of jokes about free speech. In both the USA and the USSR there is freedom of speech, but in the USA there is also freedom after speech. Our dark humor was a defense mechanism against the dark reality of our circumstances. Criticizing our corrupt communist regime was popular, but it was also done in private, away from the eyes and ears of the ever-present KGB. Only the bravest dissidents, people like Andrei Sakharov and Nathan Sharansky, spoke openly, and they paid the price. Things began to change in the mid-1980s as the USSR began to come apart under Gorbachev's perestroika and Thatcher and Reagan's hard line. As the up-and-coming challenger for the World Chess Championship and a bit of a young loudmouth at 22 years of age, I must admit, I relished the opportunity to see how far my newfound fame would protect me. My 1985 interview with German magazine Der Spiegel, in which I blasted the Soviet sport authorities, was like a bomb going off back in Moscow. A Soviet sports star, yes, chess players or sports stars in the Soviet Union, criticizing the authorities and in the Western press no less. It was a huge scandal, and I was lucky that Gorbachev had just recently taken over, and he was concerned about his reformer image. But there is a reason dictatorships crush even the smallest sign of dissent. A little leads to more. Soon, it wasn't just advantaged individuals like me speaking out. Soviet periodicals were testing the warming waters with critical comments. The authorities were confused. Should they crack down? Let it go? With no clear signals from the top, the entire system of repression and censorship wobbled and unraveled. Dictatorships are obsessed with stopping free speech because they want to control the flow of information in order to perpetuate their power. The USSR is a cautionary tale for modern dictators and would-be dictators as to what happens to them when they don't. From the extremes of history and dictatorships, I'd like to shift to the damage caused by shutting down the free flow of information in any society, including the freest ones. Free speech is about ideas, and when people are unable or unwilling to share their ideas, the result is intellectual stagnation. Not just to individuals, but to the society at large. When a central state authority insists on certain ideas as right or wrong, as allowed or censored, there can be no growth. Like nature, ideas thrive with competition. The free market of debate, analysis, stipulation, and refutation. But it is not only a totalitarian regime that can stifle that competition. The members of a society can do it to themselves by shutting down areas of discussion as unacceptable. Worse, the ideas themselves aren't the only targets, but so are the people who speak them. I've long heard concerns about the rise of this cancel culture, especially in US academia. So I was impressed by the open letter put together by Harper's magazine, sounding an alarm, and happy to add my name. It is an inoffensive tract on the importance of the free flow of ideas and the need to resist the impulse to excommunicate those who express views heretical to the left-leaning orthodox. I will hasten to say that I am no absolutist. Many ideas have been dumped deservedly into a dustbin of intellectual history and should stay there. And those who still try to tout them deserve to be shunned by a respectable society. An open society won't jail you for your speech, but it is not obliged to listen to you either. Nor does the free market of ideas mean an immunity to criticism. a common strawman argument in this debate. If no one disagrees with your ideas enough to criticize them, they're probably relevant. The problem arises when there is the popular rush to condemn someone for what they have said because their ideas are ideologically or politically unfashionable or offensive to this or that group. Then that rush turns into punitive pursuit, often extending to the target's employment, colleagues, and friends. The chilling effect on the free exchange of ideas is apparent, and the consequences are profound. People learn by saying wrong things, even offensive things, that can then be corrected. If you're afraid of speaking your mind, how does your mind ever change? And often society progresses by hearing heterodox views that over time become accepted. Since I'm speaking for Avast, I will make a quick security metaphor. Voting machines are a prime target for hackers. And you must assume that voting machines running on open source software will be a blunder. After all, if everyone in the world can look at the code, they can find flaws and ways to hack it. But that is the point. Everyone can find the flaws and fix them before the bad guys exploit them. If the code is secret, far fewer eyes will see it. And the bugs and security holes are less likely to be found, except by the bad guys. Similarly, ideas that aren't discussed don't get rigorous review. If they are in the open, bad ideas can be refuted and good ideas can be improved. It's worth repeating that this isn't a matter of thin-skinned elites worried about losing their ivory tower perches. Jonathan Rauch did a fine job of defining the difference between criticism and cancel culture at the Persuasion website. He summarizes it, quote, "Criticism marshals evidence and arguments in a rational effort to persuade. Canceling, by contrast, seeks to organize and manipulate the social or media environment in order to isolate, deplatform, or intimidate ideological opponents," unquote. And to anyone who says that the current trend is led by those seeking only greater justice and equality, I find that to be an uncomfortably familiar argument. When any group, any government denounces someone in the name of justice or organizes reprisals on the ground of equality, it brings me back to the pre-1984 Soviet Union. The USSR represented the ultimate victory of a monolithic idea of justice by ideological purity, of equality by decree, both in the service of power. If you feel like you must punish and tear down others to make room for you and your ideas, I must question your motives and your ideas. To try to make a little peace in my conclusion, I believe it is vital to constantly bring new voices and new ideas into our culture and our lives. Diversity isn't merely an ethnicity matter or a buzzword. Diversity of ideas is how open societies thrive and why closed societies do not. We cannot become a more just, more open, and more equal society by closing our minds. Thank you for joining me in this marketplace of ideas courtesy of Avast Security. I hope you will join me in lockdown in the next segment to hear my conversation on these themes with a special guest. I'll be speaking with Thomas Chatterton Williams, one of the authors of the Harper's letter. Until then, stay safe. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Garry on Lockdown for Avast. I'm honored to have with me today Thomas Chatterton Williams, an American author and critic. Along with two great books and many bylines, he's also fond of writing letters. We're going to discuss one letter in particular, the open letter that I signed, published in Harper's magazine, about threats to free speech I talked about in my first segment. And while every author hopes for a big response to his works, I'm pretty sure Mr. Williams was as surprised as I was about the firestorm of attention the Harper's letter received. After all, what could be less controversial than supporting free speech or the free flow of ideas? In fact, much of the response to the letter seemed to me to confirm much of what it said, as online mobs attacked various signatories while ignoring the content of the letter. First, hello to you, Mr. Williams, and thank you for joining me in lockdown.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I hope you are doing well and amidst all that is happening these days.
Yeah, no, we're okay here. In Paris, the cases are spiking, but all is still pretty fine, pretty normal.
So in my first segment, I made the contrast between the free speech discussed in Harper's letter and the kind of censorship I grew up in the Soviet Union, where the government controlled all the media. So it's the letter is about what it's about. It's not exactly the free speech under threat. That's why the title of the letter was A Letter on Justice and Open Debate. And it's a relatively new term that has been introduced, cancel culture. So could you explain a little about why the letter came about and why cancel culture is so dangerous in the society?
Sure. Well, one thing I just want to say is, as the summer has progressed and as this conversation has really taken off, and we've been debating what's so bad about cancel culture and whether cancel culture even exists, because many push back and say that it's a completely made-up phenomenon. I've really come to understand that the term is something that people use in very different ways and maybe not helpful anymore. Watching the Republican National Convention and Donald Trump Jr. and a lot of bad faith actors in the Trump administration kind of jumping on this term and using it as like a bludgeon against the left in ways that are just for political gain and are not about defensive liberal values makes me question the utility of the term. But it's also, it's the term with which we all speak about a phenomenon that is real. And so I think that it's very difficult to get out of this language, but I just want to call attention to the fact that I think that this term is not always used in good faith. Though I think that what you're talking about is what prompted us to write this letter, in which we didn't use the term cancel culture, but we wanted to identify a mood of censoriousness and conformity of thought and opinion that's been growing in our cultural and media landscapes and workplaces. So it was myself, George Packer, Mark Lilla, Robert Worth, and David Greenberg, and we were having an ongoing conversation during lockdown about what we were watching happen and the kind of call-outs and internet pile-ons and public shaming and guilt by association tactics that have been happening. And we wanted to call attention to it and simply say that we reaffirm basic core liberal values. It's nothing like what you talked about experiencing in the Soviet Union. We're aware that there's a sense of proportion. But it is something that's, that seems to be novel and exacerbated by social media and technology, the prevalence of camera phones and all of this. And we wanted to make a clear statement reaffirming these values. And so we wanted to get people like yourself and other people with large audiences to sign. And we hope that maybe we would have a conversation about what we were noticing. Hopefully we could have a conversation for a couple of days. And then the response, international in scope and 2 months and counting, has been really something else, something beyond what we could have imagined. But I think that the fact that there's been such a response all over the world and so sustained really underscores the fact that this is not a made-up phenomenon. We put our fingers on something that many people have felt is real and is a problem.
Yeah, it's a very important point about the response to the letter, because very few who criticize the letter discuss the content of the letter. They attack individual, the signatories. And it reminded me, I have to say, not just the Soviet Union, but also Putin's Russia. Because erasing people, famous people from history books, was not only Soviet practice, but it has been introduced by Putin's regime as well. So in 2015, one of the oldest Soviet sport clubs, Spartak, celebrated its 80th birthday. And I was a member of this club since 1976, arguably one of the most decorated Soviet athletes in general, and of course for Spartak. but my name has mysteriously disappeared from the book. So,
wow.
That's cancel culture, by KGB in action. Yeah.
Wow.
And I thought, well, when I signed the letter, that's, it was not an attempt to preserve some advantages of the that allegedly famous people can enjoy, and that was one of the accusations. To the contrary, I felt I was speaking out for people who did not have a name or platform like mine, and who might be afraid to speak out because they were at much higher risk. And I think that's was a motivation for many of the famous people who signed a letter. It's helping hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of others who are simply terrorized by what we call it, cancel culture or whatever. I thought that the letter helped them, and hopefully it will, we can continue this work of giving voice to those who do not have the same platform to express their views.
I mean, that's absolutely right. The idea that this was to preserve advantages of people such as yourself, who've already you've already made your mark in your life. I mean, J.K. Rowling is not going to be canceled. Malcolm Gladwell is not going to be canceled. But it would be absurd to presume that a list of 150 or even 100,000 people whose names are not recognizable could draw attention to this matter that really does affect people who are much more vulnerable than famous and successful people. So I saw it as people with names and platforms and with a level of security speaking up on behalf of people that couldn't, and it was a real act of generosity on behalf of the people who are well established to speak up. And I mean, if it means anything anecdotally, I know that myself and many other people involved in the orchestration of the letter have email inboxes full of thank you notes from people, both well-known and people completely anonymous, who said that they weren't in a position to speak up, but thank you, because it makes it a little bit saner in their workplace. And maybe if more and more people speak up, we can push back and normalize, a commitment to these values of free expression and thought that really aren't very controversial.
Yeah, but we know that radicals are always in minority, but the real danger when they succeed in stealing the show and take control of narrative and just fill the stage with this questionable characters and they create an illusion of speaking on behalf of majority. And I think the letter basically reveals that the king is not naked, but it definitely doesn't have the same kind of clothes that they pretended.
Well, that's right. I was just going to say that you're putting your finger on the onlooker effect, which is the most powerful weapon that the radical kind of fringe movements have, is the cowing people who see what happens when one person is made an example of. And that's how a minority can really control, a disagreeing majority.
A couple of practical questions. So as the letter says, chilling of speech can feel like an abstract and distant threat, while there are very clear and present dangers in both the physical world and the world of ideas right now. Just a few years ago, Americans might have thought fascism and socialism were only from history books. But not anymore. We could see this, the rise, the simultaneous rise, the fringe movements are both on the right and the left. So how can we fight against the extremes while still keeping our society open? Isn't the degree of illiberalism toward illiberalism required? So what about Karl Popper's famous intolerance of intolerance?
This is where it gets very tricky, but I think that's why we have to err on the side of maximal tolerance, even of behaviors and views that really go against our personal likes and preferences. I think that we can't tolerate illiberalism even when it seems to be coming from the side that we believe is good. Because once you start making that rod, that's a rod that anybody can pick up, and that rod will be used on your own back. These are weapons that anyone can pick up and use, and I think that we have an overconfidence in our ability to control the beast and to use it for our own advantage, and we don't really see the ways in which down the road we're making the tools for our own destruction. So I think that we have to be, you always get to a point where it's difficult to, how tolerant of intolerance can you be? We can debate that, but I think that we really just have to reaffirm maximal openness, maximal freedom to offend and to be uncomfortable, and to air ideas in public, and not to keep disagreement private because it might help our opponents in the short term.
Yeah, okay, couldn't agree more. Now let's look at the actors on the stage. So what role do you see the big tech companies like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook having in this free speech battle? I've written for years that they became part of the problem when they shifted from social network to social media. So broadcasting instead of connecting. And they have become radicalization engines, pushing people towards extreme positions while our political institutions cannot keep up with this development. So question is, do they have a responsibility to society, or more specifically, do our governments have a responsibility to regulate them?
This is a really tricky question because I don't think that anybody fully understands the extent to which our behavior has been changed already. Radicalization engines is exactly the way to put it. We are incentivized to keep finding the most superlative, the superlative versions of our arguments and ideas, and to efface nuance and gray areas. And we're rewarded even on the level of brain chemistry for doing this, because we get more likes and retweets and popularity, reinforcement of our views. On YouTube, you watch a video and then you watch a more extreme version of that view and a more extreme in the rabbit hole. Can government regulate that? I'm not sure. Do we want tech CEOs to regulate that? I don't know that I'm comfortable with Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey deeming what is and is not acceptable speech. I think we're in an unprecedented mass experiment, and it's really something that we have to think quite carefully on how to rein in, and can we rein it in?
Yeah, I also agree, because I'm very skeptical about these radical suggestions of splitting Facebook and just doing the same as American government and legislation did to Standard Oil 110 years ago. Because splitting Standard Oil in 35 or so subsidiaries and creating companies help competition, but creating 35 small Facebooks, I don't see how it's going to cure the problem. It will be probably more difficult. Yeah, because it's the fake news industry. It doesn't need only one channel. Actually, it uses many channels. So I agree with you that it's unprecedented challenge to us, and unfortunately, our experience of the past is not very helpful in offering us so a simple and radical solutions that can help can help address this issue.
And that's why I think we have to be careful before we ask for some authority to come in and do the regulating for us. It's mayhem and pandemonium now, but the cure of having some authority deem what is and what is not acceptable might be much worse, actually.
Yeah, but also I think the authority should respond to the public demand, and it seems to me that the public is willingly willingly complaining about it, but I don't see the public's message to the authorities, do this or that. So because the way people operate online and use this social media services, it's there is obvious prevalence of convenience over privacy and security. So yes, everybody talks about security, but at the end of the day, they are more than welcome to use another function on their iPhone that will help them just to speed up a process for a few seconds of reaching out here and there. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So to wrap up, going back to the public, our audience. So what can they do to push back and to encourage the free flow of ideas? Is it enough to put, is it enough to just not participate in online mobs, not to contact someone's employer if you don't like their ideas, or to use popular phrasing, it is necessary to be an anti-canceller? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think actually that's a good way of putting it, and to get into the kind of common parlance that's taking off right now with racism and anti-racism. I think that people have to speak up. I think that many people don't agree with this, but it is actually something that requires employers are making snap judgment decisions because it looks like there's a huge amount of demand for someone to be canceled or fired. These public shamings and pile-ons, they come so fast and they burn so bright that I think that oftentimes employers make snap judgments. But if more people would speak up and say, no, this is a bridge too far. We disagree, we argue, but we don't call for people's livelihoods to be stripped from them in the court of public opinion like this, then I think that employers wouldn't respond so fast. And so I think that it is incumbent on all of us who are uncomfortable with this, not just to sit back and keep our heads down, but to actually speak up. And is it the same as what people are undergoing in the part of the world that you come from and many other places where speaking up bears a much more extreme cost? No, it's not the same thing, but I do think that these behaviors operate on a spectrum, and that allowing a liberalism to grow and to foster in society, you don't know where that ends. So I think that right now we know that there's a problem, and more of us need to come together and make our voices heard in opposition to that problem. Great.
So many thanks to my guest, Thomas Chatterton Williams. If you have not read the Harper's letter or his long interview in the New Yorker, I highly recommend them both. And of course, I look forward to whatever you work on next. Until next time, this is Garry on lockdown for Avast. Stay safe.